Hi, welcome to this Parenting Place webinar. I'm Heather Hale and I'm here with Louise Tankay from the Sleep Store. Thanks for coming, Louise.
My pleasure.
Today we're discussing toddlers and wartime at bedtime. So, Louise, what are some of the biggest problems you come up against with toddlers and bedtime?
The biggest problem is toddlers that just won't get into bed and go to sleep. We also have lots of people with toddlers who wake up lots of times in the night, toddlers who go wandering around the house visiting mum and dad in the middle of the night, and then the toddlers who wake up at 5 o'clock every morning and think it's playtime.
Right, not good.
Not good. It makes for a very long day with the toddler when you start at 5 o'clock.
Definitely. So Louise, why do toddlers battle going to bed?
I think toddlers will battle everything. You know, they battle at bedtime because they can. Toddlers are, challenging and pushing boundaries and trying to find out what the limits are, all times of the day. One of my kids would never get in his car seat without a fight. Or you have the toddlers who will fight if you give them a broken biscuit rather than a whole one. So a toddler will fight about everything. And if they're allowed to get away with it at bedtime, then the battle will just continue.
Okay.
And also with toddlers, often by bedtime toddlers are overtired, they get a second wind and get revved up, or they're screaming because they've had a really tiring day. And so often it's the combination of them already being past it and this battle of the wills that will happen at every opportunity.
Okay. So Louise, what makes the biggest difference when you're trying to improve a toddler's sleep time?
Parents make the biggest difference. Parents are in control, or should be in control, of bedtime and how the child sleeps. And if the child is in control, then something's wrong in your house. So the main things that parents need to look at is they need to have a plan. They need to have a simple, clear plan that both parents agree on. Then they need to be consistent. If a toddler has different expectations from day to day, or the parents, start out on a plan and then after a day or two change their mind or give in to the toddler's demands, then the toddler will just be really, really confused and no behaviour will change. Yeah. If anything, it will get worse.
Okay.
So parents need to have a plan, they need to be consistent with how they implement it, and then the child needs the opportunity to actually learn to sleep. And what I mean by that is if you always sit with your child until they fall asleep, or if the child comes into your bed in the middle of the night and you always just let them stay in your bed, you're actually not giving them the opportunity to learn to sleep independently. So that's really, really important.
Okay.
And then another example would be if a child's learning to walk, if you always carry them because you're worried they'll fall over and hurt themselves and cry, then they'll never learn to walk. Yeah. So with sleep, sometimes you actually need to give them the opportunity, and yes, they might cry and have a bit of a tantrum, but without the opportunity, they don't learn that really important skill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think bedtime routine is really important then?
I do. I think that bedtime routines are essential because toddlers need to understand your expectations, and toddlers do best when they know what's happening next. So a really simple bedtime routine is important. It doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to have the same things in roughly the same order every day.
Okay. And for what kind of time span, like half an hour before bed, or does it need to be longer than that?
I think from dinner time onwards, you should be working towards bedtime. So I would encourage parents to have really quiet activities and winding down from dinner onwards.
Okay.
So not a lot of kind of rough and tumble or running around. I definitely would encourage people to have no TV after dinner because the blue light that TV screens emit stops children actually being able to fall asleep.
Okay.
So, no computer time, no TV time before bed.
Okay.
And then from about half an hour before bedtime, so from about 6:30, you'd be wanting to have your children in their jammies, in their bedrooms. Say 3 stories is a good number.
Okay.
Cuddles, maybe listen to some music and then into bed, ready for sleeping at 7 o'clock.
Okay. I really do find that consistency is the hardest thing about putting Heidi to bed.
Yeah, it can be difficult for parents to kind of decide to be consistent and to follow through on it. But it's good to remember that it only normally takes about 3 days to set new habits with bedtimes and with improving your children's sleep. If you can commit to a plan and follow through for 3 days, you'll generally find things improve quite quickly.
Okay.
But parents who say they've tried everything and they've tried everything for 1 day, or they've tried something for half an hour and the child's not sleeping, so they lurch onto a different plan, that's when it gets really difficult.
Sure.
And you'll end up undoing any good work
Right.
when you chop and change.
Okay. Do you have any other really great tips about creating a routine?
One other thing which is handy to remember is that toddlers like to have a sense of control. They like to make some choices and they like to think that they're the one who's the boss.
Okay.
And so you can play along with that by letting your children make some of the decisions around bedtime. Things like what time to go to bed and where to sleep and whether to go to bed or not, those are not up for discussion. But things like, should I read you the Maisie story or the Spot story first? Or would you like your red pyjamas or your blue pyjamas tonight? Or shall we sit up or shall we lie down for our stories? Those are little choices where it doesn't actually matter which choice, but they get to feel that they're having some say in how things go tonight. And that works really well. You'll get a lot more buy-in and you'll get your child complying with your requests if they get to, have some say in it.
Okay. Anything else that helps with getting toddlers to go to sleep?
Another thing which parents often will not have considered is using white noise. People often now use white noise with babies. It's any kind of consistent shushing kind of noise or the sound of the rain or ocean waves. But that's really, really effective with toddlers as well.
Okay.
It helps to block out external noises. So if mum and dad are still up and talking and doing the dishes or watching TV, some white noise can block out all of that external noise. And it also really helps children to just get into a relaxed state. Toddlers have quite a busy day and they might be quite wired still when they're going into bed, but if they have a nice kind of calming environment, then that will certainly help.
Okay.
Music can help too. If you don't like the idea of white noise or you prefer to use some classical music, that can help.
Okay.
Or even a story on CD. It doesn't have to be particularly relaxing, it's just something for your child to focus on.
Right.
You can say, if you're still lying down on your pillow, I'll leave your Bob the Builder CD running. Or my little 3-year-old really likes the Wonky Donkey. He goes to bed with the Wonky Donkey song on repeat, which is hardly relaxing, but he likes it and it's part of his routine. He'll ask for it now and he can get up and turn it on for himself.
Oh, right.
So some sort of sound is good.
Okay.
The next thing would be something to cuddle. Toddlers love to cuddle, and if they don't have something in their bed to cuddle, they will go looking for a cuddle from mum and dad. They will go walking around the house, go back to the lounge, go in the middle of the night. So some sort of comfort blanket or a soft toy, I think, is an essential.
Okay.
And the third thing would be a night light. It's very common for toddlers to be scared of the dark, or even if they're not scared of the dark, they will just like to kind of see where they are and see that their teddy's there, and see that they're in their bedroom and they can find their blankets and pull them up. All of those things are much, much easier with a really soft night light.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I know it's quite common for toddlers to have nightmares.
It is. Much more common, surprisingly, than nightmares are what's called night terrors or sleep terrors.
Okay.
So this generally happens in the first few hours of the night, so generally from between about 9 and 10 p.m. And the child will look like they're having a nightmare. They'll be screaming, crying. In some night terror episodes, the child might actually get out of bed and roll around on the floor, kind of, in quite a state. But the key with night terrors is the child's actually still asleep.
Right.
So it happens in a similar state of consciousness to sleepwalking or sleep talking. So when your child is having this episode and they're screaming, you'll naturally rush in to see what the matter is and try and comfort them. But often the child will be going, no, 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 and be pushing the parent away, and will be completely unresponsive to what would normally calm them down.
Wow.
So that's how you tell it's a night terror. You just ask them if they want to cuddle, or you try and offer some comfort. And if they absolutely don't want to know, then it's a night terror, and your best response to a night terror is just leave them to it.
Okay.
Because they're actually still asleep.
Right.
If you try and wake them up, they'll freak out and wonder what all the fuss is about.
Okay.
So their eyes might be open, but they'll probably be a bit sort of glassy and, you know, they're just not with it at all. And parents often will say, my child just wasn't with it at all, because they're actually still asleep.
Okay.
So that's what happens in the first part of the night, and you just try to check your child is safe and then just shut the door and leave them to it.
Okay.
But an actual nightmare generally happens at the other end of the night, so, you know, sort of around 5 o'clock normally, just sort of as your child's in that last couple of hours of sleep. And with a nightmare, you'll get the classic sobbing, and the child will respond straight away to comfort, and they will want you there, and they will want you to calm them down. And that's a good way to tell. You know, just look at the timing of when the crying in the night's happening, and you'll be able to tell quite easily if it's something that you need to just ignore, or whether it's something where your child's genuinely upset. They might be responding to something that happened the day before, maybe, you know, a scary story or something they saw on TV, or they might have just got overtired. And then in that case, you obviously just calm them down and tuck them back into bed.
So are you into doing debriefing after a nightmare?
I don't think you need to make too big a deal of a nightmare, really. I think the main thing is just to calm your child down as quickly as possible and get them back to sleep.
Okay.
Yeah, children, you know, they have a bit of an imagination by the time they're 2 or 3, but don't make more of it, because you might end up freaking them out and causing more nightmares to happen if you go into it in too much detail. Just be in the moment and calm them down and get them back to sleep.
Good. Okay. So what should you do if your child just won't stay in bed?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's the biggest challenge often for parents of toddlers. So the first thing I would say is keep your child sleeping in a cot for as long as possible. You know, is keep them in the cot as long as it's safe. Once they can climb out and they're in danger of falling out and landing on their head, it's time for a bed. But up until then, as long as they fit in the cot, keep them in there. But once they are in a bed and they can pop up and down, it is very common for them to want to do that, to reappear down the hallway just when mum and dad are finally settled down for the evening. So the first thing I would look at doing is shutting their door. You know, children should not be walking around the house during the night, because it's just not safe. You know, children have been known to walk out the front door and wander down the street. So for me, all my children have their door closed at night, and I think that's just a basic safety thing, and it stops the wandering around at bedtime. The second thing would be, I'm really not a fan of that super nanny approach where parents take their children back to bed, you know, 100 times. People will have seen that on lots of TV programs where the super nanny says, just keep taking them back to bed and don't engage with them. But in my experience of, you know, working with, you know, hundreds of parents of toddlers who do this, that never works, because the child just thinks it's a game. And if we remember, we talked about, you know, this is a battle, and it's, you know, children will test the limits. They have got the stamina of an ox to go back and forwards, up and down the hallway all night. So I would not engage in that game with your child. Just either decide to just shut the door and leave them, and they will scream and have a paddy, and we'll talk about that as a technique. But that's one option. Or the other option, if your child just really wants your company at bedtime and they will settle if you're with them, then I would just give them that attention and sit with them while they fall asleep. Because that, for you as a parent, it's much more pleasant to sit there and have a nice calm bedtime while your child falls asleep than you get into a situation of fighting with them and backwards and forwards and listening to all the carrying on. But think of it as a transitional step. So, you know, have a nice sit down with them, listen to some music together, read your stories, and then say to your child, I'll sit with you until you fall asleep, and then commit to do that. Don't sort of try and sneak out when you think they're half asleep, because they will know and they won't trust you any longer. So sit with them, get them into the habit of falling asleep without making a drama. And do that for a couple of nights. You know, maybe get them used to listening to some white noise, make sure they've got their teddy to cuddle, introduce the nightlight if you haven't. And then once your child is no longer fighting you at bedtime, then you can gradually start to remove yourself. So you could sit on the end of the bed would be a good next step. Do that for a couple of nights. You might need to say, I'm just right here, I'm just sitting here while you fall asleep, but I'll still be here until you go to sleep. And once they're okay with that, then try a chair next to the bed. And do that for a couple more nights, and then you can just move the chair towards the door.
Right.
So that technique is really calm, it's really gentle, it avoids all the screaming, but it does work if the parent is consistent. So what I mean by that is, don't one night sit quietly with them and say you'll stay till they fall asleep, and then the next night, oh, I'm a bit tired, I can't be bothered, so I'll just shut the door and leave them screaming, or I can't be bothered taking them back to bed, so we'll just, have them walking around the house.
Sure.
Yeah, so you need to decide on that technique and then follow through with it until they're sleeping independently at bedtime.
The Parenting Place online shop is full of practical parenting books and resources recommended by our parenting experts. For more information on this topic, visit our online shop.